Zionism.
Okay, we're being recorded.
Then I'll stop talking.
Huh?
Hello, everybody. How are you doing?
Hi, Rabbi.
How are you? How are you?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I noticed that it said that these are being recorded.
Yes.
If we miss one and want to see it, how would we access it?
There is a YouTube channel that I upload these on. If you go search Chabad Bethesda, you'll be able to find them on the YouTube channel.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And they're under the title "The Inside Story."
So there's a couple of other Chabad rabbis that I study with, and I don't think they record theirs. How hard is it to do this?
It's starting a Zoom. All you do is hit the record button at the bottom. I actually have it set it in the settings that it automatically starts recording, just in case I forget. But there's a button on the list on the toolbar that comes up at the bottom of the screen that has the record button. Just hit record. It saves it to a file on your computer, and then you just upload that file to YouTube.
That's the hard part, the uploading to YouTube. Is that hard?
Nope. It's all pretty straightforward.
Wow.
Oh,
Unless
okay.
unless I just happen to be a tech genius. But
So it's
Well, you
recorded.
have children, that's why.
no, your children are what show you that you are very far from a tech genius. 'Cause at the age
But they
of
do it.
Right.
You have a whole tech department in your house at all times.
Right. Well, or at least currently a tech sabotage department, because I'll oftentimes come onto my Zoom to notice backgrounds and.
Right. What was that thing with the eyebrows last week? That was so funny.
Yeah. Well, that's my kids having a good time with it. Yeah. Last, you were saying something?
No, so you say you record and then you have to upload it to YouTube?
Yeah.
Is there a button for that, or you have to know how to do that?
I'm sure there is. I just do it the old-fashioned way. I go open up YouTube. You set up a channel, and then you just click upload videos, and you pick the file from your computer, kind of like when you're putting up an attachment from into an email or whatever it is. It'll open up a search window to the files in your computer. You got to know where Zoom is saving the files to.
Well, would it be okay with you if I had Noam Cohen get in touch with you?
From Ocean City.
Yeah, because I study with him every Wednesday evening.
All right. I mean,
And-
I'm sure he knows. I'm sure he knows. You just have to push him to do it.
No, he doesn't know, because I just had him buy a tablet because he was doing his teaching with his cell phone. I had him go out and buy a tablet so that he doesn't get interrupted by phone calls. So I don't know if he knows.
All right. If he doesn't know, I'll be happy to walk him through. Really
Thank you.
All right. Absolutely. All right, everybody. Are we ready to jump into this week's Parshat? Parshat Pinchas. So I'll first start with a little bit of trivia. Not trivia, but a life hack. Right? This is something that's going to be very relevant to all of you. Okay, here we go. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you're buying a used Sefer Torah, like we all do on a weekly basis.
I have.
Oh, see, I told you. And you want to get a sense as to the caliber of the Torah, of how well it's been maintained, whether it has aged or what have you. If you want to get a sense, how do you're not, and you don't have the time to scroll, no pun intended, all the way through the entire Torah. How do you get a sense as to the overall health of this used Torah scroll. Right? Like whenever you buy a used car, obviously, those that are in the know where to look. Where under the hood you should look to get a real good sense of the wear and tear on this particular vehicle and how healthy it is. So believe it or
That
not,
is it.
I'm not sure that you're going to go here, that this is what you had intended, but in Parshat Pinchas, in some Sifrei Torah, there's one letter that sometimes is, what's the word, cut, it's not cut off, shortened? It's like either above or a nun, I can't remember. Is that what you're talking about?
I wasn't going to go there because then you're talking about like custom or tradition.
Yeah,
No,
I'm talking about something more basic.
okay.
oh, you X-ray it.
No, I'm going to get even more basic. You turn to Parshas Pinchas. This is standard operating procedure. Why? Because Parshat Pinchas is the most read section of any Torah. Because every Rosh Chodesh, you are turning to Parshat Pinchas. Every holiday, you turn to Parshat Pinchas. Because in it, it talks about the process of bringing the offerings of each of these special days onto the altar in the Beit HaMikdash, or into the Mishkan. Back then it was a Mishkan, and eventually the Beit HaMikdash. What the process of offerings are to commemorate these special days on the calendar. And in our Jewish practice, when we arrive at those days on the calendar, then invariably for Maftir, for the final Aliyah, right before the Haftorah, we read that particular section in Parshat Pinchas that discusses the process of the offerings that we commemorate with our reading, but that we cannot actually do now that we do not have the temple. So every holiday, every day of every holiday, be it Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, all the days of Sukkot, the 8 days of Pesach, the 7/8 days of Pesach, days of Shavuot, and every Rosh Chodesh, we turn to Parshat Pinchas. So if there is a section of the Torah, of any Torah, that gets the most wear and tear, it's going to be Parshat Pinchas. So now you know. Now you know. Now you are a professional assessor of used Torah scrolls.
Oh, yeah, you're
So
right.
if there's a mistake in Pinchas, there's no point in going farther.
Not a mistake, but I'm saying if it's worn out. Generally, it's not about a mistake as much as when
Oh,
you're
yeah.
buying a used Torah, you're concerned about whether it's been too worn out, whether
Right.
all the years of use, of consistent use, has made it. So this is the way. This is the way. So just an interesting thing. Why do I bring this up? Simply, first of all, because it's just an interesting tidbit, but also importantly because it's Parshat Pinchas is unique in that sense. This is the most read Torah portion in the entire Torah by a mile, by a long shot. If you think about other Torah portions that get read, you'll have sections of Parshat Naso that get read 2-3 times because you read it on Hanukkah. So what I mean 2-3 times, I mean 2 or 3 instances, but a total of 9 times. Other sections that get read on a given time. You'll have before Maftir, you'll have the sections in Parshat Shemot that talk about the Exodus, and that will be the primary reading of Pesach, etc. So we oftentimes read sections in the Torah multiple times, but none of them nearly as much as Parshat Pinchas. If you're making the count in your head, Pinchas gets read over 30-something times a year. Because just with Rosh Chodesh, half are 1 day Rosh Chodesh, but half are 2 day Rosh Chodesh. That's 12 plus 6 is 18. 8 days of Pesach, 9 days of Sukkot, 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, 1 day of Yom Kippur. I start adding that up. That's over 30 times that you are reading from Parshat Pinchas. Now, this parsha, it's interesting because it seems to be that a lot of fundamental ideas are within a parsha that's title is the name of an individual, right? Parshat Yitro has the Ten Commandments, right? Parshat Balak has the has the Matovu. Now you're going to say, Rabbi, that's cheating because every Torah portion has something central and fundamental to Judaism because it's the Torah. And the answer to that is yes. But nothing in the Torah is coincidence. And if Parshat Pinchas has
I just think that this is, I've said to you before, I think this is all a big cheat because the names and the way it was broken up were chosen later.
Not necessarily. You are correct. Well, the way we break down Torah portions, and in a sense, the titles, there are traditions that date back to Moshe himself. Halacha Moshe Misina. Now, not always did we have such a rigid system. So define of kind of the weekly Torah, and as Jerry, you are correct. The men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, later put a lot of the more the structure of Judaism in place, and then had to kind of create structures in order to establish the structure. But the idea
it's not Sinai is all I'm saying.
No. So, Halacha Moshe Sinai. So now it wasn't necessarily codified, but the idea of the names and the way we refer to it, and because otherwise, to your point, we would not really be able to make a Torah study out of the name of a Torah portion if it was just given by rabbis later, then yes, we can ask why the rabbis, but we can't make it some sort of discussion about divine intent if the name is given by a whole bunch of rabbis. You can't call that the intent of God. It's more the intent of the rabbis. But we do, and we're not the first ones. It's not like the first generation that does this. This goes back to the days of the Talmud, et cetera, that are learning information, learning lessons, divine lessons from the names of the Torah portions. So yes, while we don't see it recorded in Scripture, but and it was first, the details are recorded only later. But it's the same thing like tefillin or whatever it is, what we call a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, where we don't have in the Torah defined black boxes with leather straps and all that. We first find that recorded later, but the rabbis didn't make it up. The rabbis are following tradition that dates all the way back to Moshe, passed it to Joshua, et cetera, and Moshe gets it from God. And that is what we call Masorah, or in this case, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And that does incorporate where we divide, included in that field of entities that are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The division of the Torah portions and their names are included. So yes, we can learn lessons from this. Either way, back to the beginning of the parsha. The Torah did something very unique in the breakdown, speaking about the breakdown of Torah portions. In the end of last week's Torah portion and the beginning of this one. For the most part, the Torah follows intuitive logic, something that we are very familiar with. That, and as I said, it's intuitive, that you end the story when you end the story. And you pick up the next volume at the beginning of the next story or the next epoch in the storyline or whatever it is. Unless you're Hollywood and you have a vested interest in ending on a cliffhanger and forcing everybody to tune in next season. right? But the Torah doesn't really do this, which makes it particularly surprising that the Torah ends last week's Torah portion right, quite abruptly, it would appear, in the middle of the story, and picks up this week. This week picks up right in the middle of the story, so that if you only, let's say you just tuned in this parsha, you wouldn't have a clue as to what's going on. Parsha opens up, and God said to Moshe as follows. Right, okay. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron Kohen, Heishiv et chamati me'al b'nei Yisrael, b'kano et kinati, b'tocham v'lo chiliti et b'nei Yisrael, b'kinati lachein hineni notin lo, et briti shalom. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron Kohen, he returned my wrath. Heishiv, he pulled it back. He pulled my wrath back from upon the people when he took my vengeance within them, and I therefore did not eradicate the people in my vengeance. Therefore, I bestow upon him my blessing of peace. That is a very powerful report. But what happened? That is a very powerful response from God to an event that if you just tuned in this week, you have no clue about. It's a response to an event. Clearly, there was some sort of major situation, right? It's like reading an article like this. You open up the reading an article. So Bill Johnson, the chief of police, says, we will never let such a thing happen again. We are doing an internal review, and from this point forward, such a terrible thing will not be allowed to occur.
I find that journalism doesn't work that way often.
But the Torah doesn't work that way.
Right. Journalism shouldn't work that way, and Torah generally doesn't work that way. Now, if you are a matmid, if you are a regular Torah study, if you are a frequent flyer, and then you will know what the Torah is talking about, because at the end of last week's Torah portion, we talked about how Bilam, after having been thwarted in his spiritual war against the Jewish people, every time he opened his mouth, out came a blessing instead of a curse, and he realized that there's no way to bring these people down from without. Externally, these people have too strong of a bond with the boss of all things, and there's going to be no way to exploit a vulnerability, because there isn't. God is perfect. God's has got a strong relationship with the people, and so there's no entry point. There's no what's the terminology in terms of like a virus or military. There is no
transmissibility.
No, I mean to say there's like no way in. A fancy term, whatever. I'm blanking on it.
Impermeable?
No, I was saying that like the virus or thing has no, like the opposite of an egress, but there's no particular
ingress,
like a host.
But there's no way in. There's no way in. The Jewish people are airtight right now. The only way Bilam understands that you will be able to develop a vulnerability in the people is if you somehow cause them to rot from within. If their relationship between them and God is not susceptible to any external salvos, but if they themselves weaken their bond with God, due to outside influence, and that's our way in, as it were, then we can cause damage. And so Bilam turns to Balak and says, here's my advice to you. Get the people to sin. Take all the beautiful maidens of Midian, where Balak was actually originally from. He only became king of Moab because they needed a out-of-the-box thinker to be their king in light of the incoming tsunami known as the Jewish people that had just bulldozed their way through every other powerful nation. If you can convince, the maidens or whatever it is, to engage in seduction of the Jewish people, bring them down, then and weaken the relationship from within, then you will see success in your efforts. And so, in fact, that is why this incident gets reported right after the high point of Bilam trying so hard to curse the people and it not working out. In fact, we can almost see it coming because to a certain degree, Bilam gives up the ghost of trying to curse the people when he sees them maintain an incredible sense of modesty. Right? Matovu or Halach Yaakov, as we talked about, that the entrances of the tent didn't face each other. And he knows that this is something that is particularly precious to God. Right? The laws of proper relationships, etc., are a huge amount of the mitzvot. This is a very important concept to God. And the Jewish people adhering to it are obviously bolstering the relationship with God. So Bilam says, here, you want to know that something that people are particularly susceptible to and will give you tremendous return on investment? Get them to screw up this way. Right? You can try, there's a whole bunch of different ways to get somebody to sin, right? Wasting time, violating Shabbos, violating kosher. But this thing is a pet peeve of God. By the way, anybody know what section of the Torah do we read at Mincha of Yom Kippur, right before Ne'ilah?
Oh, God.
The section that discusses permissible and prohibited intimate relations.
Yeah.
This is very important stuff to God, bottom line. And is honestly, it really is the canary in the coal mine of any culture's imminent decay. Think about it. Egypt right before it had its downfall. Rome right before it had its downfall. This is where people in power lose their integrity, their standards, etc. This issue of promiscuity. It was the next thing that the rabbis decided to tackle head on. And they made a famous section of Talmud because it is a very fascinating piece of Talmud. It says that the rabbis convened.
Rabbi, do you think that the Chinese don't know this?
You and I are thinking the same things right now.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
I don't want to. I
I'm
hear what you're
actually
saying.
texting it to you.
I know. I hear what you're saying. I don't want to derail the conversation. I hear what you're saying.
But the breakdown of the purity of the wife and husband and the family. That's what it is. That's what we're talking about, and it is very and yeah.
Yeah.
I think that Bilam was doing a double whammy. Because I think that the rabbis will later equate adultery with idolatry, and in his plan, he's doing like a double whammy. I'll get both.
And no, because as you said, you're actually more. I don't know if that's more correct than you realize, but you are entirely correct because he didn't just have them engage in seduction. After the people were seduced, he then had them go serve these maidens convinced the Jews that they had seduced to also then go serve idols. So they are entirely connected. And it's actually the piece of the Talmud that I was about to reference is the one that it says that the rabbis came to realize that the Jewish people no longer were in a position where they were able to withstand the challenge of idol worship. And it was going to bring about their downfall. It was just too, it's hard for us to even fathom, because to us it sounds so weird that the greatest desire one would have would be to bow down to a block of wood or to a block of stone. But
Or
part
to a
of that,
golden calf.
right, and part of that, the reason that it's so foreign to us is as a result of this, of the rabbis coming together and them saying, we hereby decree, and any rabbinical decree must be followed by heaven, because Torah lo bashamayim.
Right.
Torah is no longer in heaven; it's the jurisdiction of the Torah is down here. We hereby decree that God remove from this world any desire for idol worship. And boom.
I wonder how, oh gosh.
No, and it
Sometimes
was,
I wonder whether that's been effective. I think we've just replaced.
so 1 minute. That
Okay.
very specific thing. And it was, and at that point, really, and this is why it says later in the Talmud, a certain rabbi scoffed at Menashe, Melech Israel, Menashe, the king of Israel, or one of the kings of Israel, who pursued idol worship, and he scoffed. He says, but he couldn't really, Jewish king, and he couldn't. There's what kind of shlomazel is he? And that night, he was visited in his dream by the soul of this Menashe, and said, how dare you? You don't even have a sense of how strong the desire was. You're sitting here and you're, again, armchair general over here, or Monday morning quarterback. If you had the same desire for idol worship that we had, you would have lifted your robes to run to the nearest place to serve an idol. So don't be so quick to judge. And he was speaking to this rabbi from the Olam HaEmes, from the world of truth. So we don't understand how powerful and potent that desire was. And so the rabbi said, really, generally a challenge is there as a growth opportunity, and so challenges may not be pleasant, but they're necessary, and so we wouldn't mess with them. But this one we have deemed as beyond the scope of the people to handle anymore. So in our capacity as the rabbinate, we hereby convene and decree that it should no longer carry that desire, that magnetism. And it was, and boom, at that point it was gone. And the rabbis were like, hey, we're on a roll. So let's take on the next major challenge, the challenge that only comes second to idolatry. And which challenge do you think that was? Promiscuity.
If we finish Avodah Zarah, then we've got adultery.
Right. And they said, we hereby decree to remove the desire for adultery, for promiscuity, all types of promiscuity from this world.
Right.
And they were patting themselves on the back until somebody comes running in horror and says, Rabbi, the chickens have stopped laying eggs.
Right.
Yeah. That's so good.
And it's such an important message, right? Talk about unintended consequences.
Right, because it's such an important message, the idea that the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara has to be sort of in a balance, not completely eradicated either one. You can go way too Tov and you can go way too Ra, but there has to be a median.
Right. I mean, there's so many lessons. Which is why it's such a fascinating piece of Talmud. Number one, teaches us about good intentions and unforeseen consequences, especially of people in power. This is something you wish that modern day people, that regulators and people in power take into consideration that when they are legislating or they are regulating whatever it is, even if in the moment it seems like the right decision, do you have the wisdom and the foresight and the humility to think beyond the immediate and to see where this would otherwise go and what might be consequences in the future for decisions that you make, or not even in the future, in the present, but outside of your immediate sphere of focus, etc. That taught the rabbis a very important lesson. But the other lesson is, as you said, Jerry, the truth is every single one of us will know that that a relationship is a very difficult thing to maintain, right? We all know this. And there needs to be a lot. There's, two chickens are going to sit there and live with each other if there isn't any desire to procreate. Are you crazy? He's going to go sit there, hang out in the pub. She's going to go, and go on walks with her friends, and they're never going to associate with each other, right? I will tell you something interesting. I mean, we're off on a real tangent, but we're going to come back. We're going to come back when this is I think it's a sweet story. When I was going out, yeshiva bacher, trying to be as pious as I could be, focused on the holy stuff and the important stuff, right? But my parents were my
3 minutes, Rabbi.
Yes, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. And then everybody will get kicked off and we'll log back in. Same deal like last week. Right. But so my parents were my sounding board, my mentors, and as I'm going out, whatever it is about. So I came to them once with a conundrum. I had an issue. I had a problem when I was going out with Nechami. And I said, and that's why I think it's sweet. It obviously is mostly a compliment to her, and indication as to my naivete, I guess. But I said, I asked my mother. I said, "Is it a problem that I happen to find her very attractive?
I remember that.
And is it clouding my judgment? And maybe I'm not supposed to be focused on these kind of things, and I should be entirely focused on her personality and her nature, her good nature, and her standards, et cetera, et cetera. Is it a problem that I find her very beautiful?" And my mother smiled, and she said, "Actually, I will tell you something that I heard when she was growing up, living in their household in New York. My grandfather's house happened to be the Rav of Crown Heights, the Rav of the capital city of Chabad, of the entire Chabad movement."
Wow.
The Rebbe was very careful to make sure that it was very clearly delineated that if you had a halachic matter or things like that, there was the Rav. You went to the Rav. People would come to the Rebbe, and obviously, of course, the Rebbe could answer. The Rav himself would consult oftentimes with the Rebbe to gain guidance, but there was a hierarchy, and if you had a halachic question, you spoke to the Rav. His name was Rabbi Dvorkin, and he was world renowned. So teenage girl, my mother says it was kind of rough growing up with that kind of holy man in the house at all times, whatever it was. But it happened to be that he would make a point of having a little conversation with each one of his great nieces or whatever it was, because he was the uncle of my grandfather. That's why he was living with him. And he didn't have any children. He didn't have a household. Him and his wife just kind of, so when his wife passed away, he moved in. He says, make sure there is physical attraction, because you're going to need everything going for you in married life. And you need to make sure there is that magnetism, that natural magnetism. You need to. So
I think that's one of the reasons why Chabad is so smart, that they do dates. They actually have like lots of dates. It's not just an arranged marriage and you see them at the altar.
Correct. Yes. And there's a lot of aspects to this, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to get kicked off. On the flip side, I'll begin with the story there. Going again. The important point of the matter is that this powerful urge is not evil. It can, unfortunately, and that's part of why it's an indication of a society gone awry, because that's a choice to take this urge in the wrong direction. This is why Judaism does not believe in celibacy. In fact, celibacy is not allowed. A rabbi you cannot be a rabbi unless you're married. It's kind of the 180 degrees from the Catholic Church. You need to be married. You need to be establishing a household. Number one, simply because otherwise you're not really relatable. You can't really relate to half the questions that you're being asked. You don't really know that whole life, that whole world. But more importantly, because there is nothing more important to God than establishing a household, etc. But coming back to this point, this was the toehold that Bilam suggests the people establish, and in fact, this meets with a lot of success, and it would have been for Bilam, which is a catastrophe for the Jewish people, and it was really, really a disaster, because those who fell prey to the seduction were not just the dregs of society, but all the way up to the greatest, including the princes of the tribes, and namely the prince of the tribe of Shimon.
Shimon.
Last week, a fellow named Zimri ben Salu, who allows himself to be seduced by the princess of Midian. Her name is Kazbi Batsur. And in a very public and flagrant way, the two of them engage in an illicit relationship. And they do so while a plague is raging among the Jewish people. Bilam was successful beyond his wildest dreams.
Oh, wait a minute. I thought the plague was caused because of the promiscuity.
Yeah, that's exactly my point.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand what you said. Sorry.
Even in the midst of the plague, it was still going on. This problem was metastasizing.
I see what you're saying.
Even as the consequence was being really terribly, terribly felt, and the people were weeping, but they weren't stopping. And this issue had climbed to the highest members of society. This had the chance of bringing down the entire Jewish people. Enter Pinchas. Pinchas, the unmasked vigilante. And Moshe and the Kohen Gadol, who was the Kohen Gadol?
Elazar.
Good. Not Aaron anymore. Aaron has passed on. Moshe and Elazar are engaged in deliberation as to what to do about this circumstance. And the people are engaged in promiscuity, and the rest of the people are engaged in dying. And this is like a real situation with a capital S. Pinchas decides he's got the solution. He knows what needs to be done. He picks up a spear and he goes forthwith into the tent of Zimri and Kazbi, and he creates a shish kebab. Skewers both of them on a pike. He raises the pike with the two of them on it, and he starts walking through the camp. And he shocks the people, and they cease to do what they are doing, and the plague ends. That's the end of Parshat Pinchas. Parshat Balak. Parshat Pinchas opens up with the aftermath, with God's statement and God's response to the event. No reference to the event whatsoever. in Parsha Pinchas, or rather not no reference to it. Yes, reference, but no review of the event. No details, no reminder, just straight as if we were still in the middle of the conversation from last week, which is why it's kind of abrupt. It really just opens up with God's response. No, in the previously on, all my Jewish children, right? No recap. Straight into the response from God. That Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen, which immediately sets the commentaries kind of alarm bells. Why? Because it is most common to identify somebody by, how do we identify somebody in Judaism?
Their name.
Well,
The Papa.
their names, Ben,
Mhm.
right? One, who they are. By the way, that is still the most common way to identify somebody, by their parents. The most common version of a last name is some derivative of that. Like not even the names that end like Sin, like Eric Sin or Robert Sin, but even when John Roberts, what's the origin of that last name, Roberts?
Robert's son.
Is you're saying John? Who's
You
John?
took off the O-N. Yeah.
It's not even.
It's Robert.
It's the S over there is.
Oh, it's a possessive.
The possessive S. Who's John? Roberts, John. John Roberts.
Got it.
Chaim Yankels. Yeah. And that is, so that's and still between that and Mick, which we know also means Mick Donald, who's the son of Donald, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what it is. All these are versions, and obviously in Russian, the the Leva, or the Ovich, or whatever, all these are all the same thing, where the most common way to refer is still the way that the Torah does, which is to say Ben, or whatever it is. But it is very uncommon for the Torah to go back more than one generation. Pinchas ben Elazar. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen is very unique, and immediately the commentaries say God is trying to say something. Now, you see, here's the thing. Pinchas is quite a controversial figure, right? To this day, people debate whether what Pinchas did was the right thing or the wrong thing, good thing or bad thing, right? Many people are very uncomfortable with what Pinchas did. There was no trial, no witnesses, no jury, no judge. Pinchas was literally judge, jury, and execution, right? Vigilantism, violence, not just vigilantism, violent vigilantism, murderous
Murder. Yeah.
vigilantism. Now, how far back does this debate go about whether what Pinchas did was right or wrong? The answer is all the way back to the times of Pinchas himself, all the way back into the immediate aftermath of his action.
So that the people were shocked to stop their bad behavior, but
The
immediately
process wasn't the typical process of having to kosher adim warn the person beforehand, and then they have to be in the middle, like right about to do it. And it wasn't done in the halachic way at all. But my question is, were there people around who could have been kosher adim? Were there enough people?
Oh, they were all. Everybody was witnessing. That was part of the problem.
No, were there kosher adim? Like
all of them. I mean, all of them were, potentially kosher adim. Okay. This was being done in flagrant. But the thing is, they were taking a step further. They weren't even debating. They weren't necessarily only debating the halachic parameters of this situation. they were also debating, like any good punditry on, the Sunday morning talk shows. Every psychologist or psychiatrist said, what was Pinchas's motivation to step in this moment? And everybody speaks with their sense. Now, not surprising, you had the partisans, behind Zimri. In other words, most of the tribe of Shimon, that was furious that Pinchas would just unceremoniously or quite ceremoniously
Right.
take out their prince like that. And so the punditry and the accusatory class is running around accusing Pinchas of being somebody who just gives in to his base violent nature.
But if they thought that, Rabbi, then why were they shocked to stop their behavior?
Why was it effective? Yeah.
Because not everybody, don't forget, but oftentimes you see almost by default. In fact, it is very common. Somebody gets caught doing an act, right? A negative act, and you think they're going to be remorseful because you see that they stop. And in the moment they're remorseful, then immediately all the creative juices in their minds start going and they start validating and justifying, rationalizing, etc. In the moment when they were caught, you see that moment of truth in their eyes, right? Ooh. And then they get a second and they really immediately start to obfuscate. And let's blame shift, right? Oh, everybody wants Pinchas. Let's talk about Pinchas. Who does he think he is? Oh, you want to say he did this? Oh, he's so righteous. Pinchas is so righteous. Do you know who he is? This is what the punditry. This is what I said. The psychologist class, and said, I'd like to remind everybody about Pinchas's grandfather. You see, Pinchas's mother was the sister of Tzipporah, Moshe's wife. In other words, the wife of Eleazar is a sister to Tzipporah. Don't forget, Yitro had 7 daughters. Now, Yitro, Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, and Eleazar's father-in-law, in other words, Pinchas's grandfather, was known to serve all types of idol worship, including fattening baby calves deliberately just to slaughter them for idol worship. In fact, his nickname was Puti, Putiel, but Puti, because Puti means to fatten up. This was the guy who was so desensitized and so callous that he was able to fatten up little baby calves, innocent baby calves, fatten them up just to then turn them and slaughter them to his idolatry. We posit that is the DNA that flows through Pinchas's veins. And Pinchas is a violent, callous individual, and he didn't do this out of any sense of
right and wrong,
holiness or righteousness, but pure zealotry. And we therefore accuse Pinchas of being a bad human being. This is one side of the debate. Who's standing on the other side of the debate?
God.
And God declares Pinchas ben Elazar ben, who's his grandfather? Don't look at Yitro.
Aaron
HaKohen. Aaron, who it says, Havei mitil midav shel Aaron, be of the children of Aaron. Ohev shalom, rodev shalom, ohevet abriod. Aaron was the lover of peace, the most peaceful man on the planet. Loved peace, pursued peace, loved every single Jew no matter what. His blood is the blood that runs through Pinchas. Don't mistake Pinchas's motivation for an outlet for his violent nature. Pinchas was acting in desperation And the fact that he was watching tens of thousands of his brothers die and nobody was doing anything about it. And he couldn't bear to see it. And so he did something drastic. Did he know that he would later be vindicated by God?
No.
No. It could be that his name would go down in infamy. And yet he did it anyway because of his incredible desire to bring peace back to his people. Our Moshe and Elazar, by the way, who's his father and his uncle are deliberating. And they'll eventually come to some sort of action. But in the meantime, thousands more will die.
So isn't part of the problem that the leaders, Moshe and Elazar,
A little paralysis by analysis?
Yeah.
The answer is yes and no. And this is a very nuanced point. You see, God is not condoning the specific action that Pinchas took. The proof of that is that God's validation and the action are in two different parashas. God's not validating the action. God's validating that an action was taken. God is complimenting Pinchas's motivation. Why? Not because what Pinchas did was wrong, but Torah is very careful to say, don't learn the lesson about the action. We're not sitting here and giving a license to everybody to carry a spear around and start skewering everybody they feel is in violation of God and causing problems. What we are condoning is take action. When you see a circumstance and you see a problem, don't sit there and say, something should be done about this.
Mm-hmm.
Or tisk, such a terrible thing. Such a terrible thing. Rather, be a Pinchas and do something about it. Now, what's to be done about it, we're not immediately saying do what Pinchas did. In Pinchas' situation and scenario, what he did was right, but only in that scenario and only that situation, which is why we don't tie the specific thing that he did to the universal approbation of God, right? That's
right. We would never teach our children this is what you do if you see something wrong.
The universal approbation is on Pinchas's motivation. The specific action is circumstantial. And that's why, very deliberately, God waited for a new parsha to share the approbation. Because God is deliberately uncoupling the universal approbation from the specific action.
Interesting.
The approbation is on the idea that Pinchas got up and did something. Because he couldn't be on the sidelines, because this was personal to him. This wasn't somebody should do something about this situation.
I've mentioned before that it amazes me in a way that people still name their kids Pinchas. And I remember your response was this.
Pinchas is an incredibly powerful name. Pinchas is the only one who earned the kahuna, right? Fascinating. You know, the famous joke, right? Fellow comes into the rabbi's office, plunks down a check, $10,000. Rabbi, make me a Kohen.
Yeah, right.
I was just thinking about that joke the other day.
But you don't understand how appropriate to this moment this is, because right, the whole joke plays out, right? Fine, I can't make you a Kohen. Rabbi, you drive a hard bargain, $15,000. Really, I can't just make you a Kohen as much as I can use the money and as much as I want to help you. Fine, Rabbi, final offer, $25,000. Tell me, why do you want to be a Kohen so badly? Well, because my father was a Kohen, his father was a Kohen. So the rabbi turns to him and says, you know what, make it 30,000 and we'll talk.
I didn't hear that part of the joke.
You know, I forgot. Is that really the punchline? I forgot that.
You see, you thought the punchline was only there's a punchline and then there's an even better punchline.
What?
Anyway, but here's what's so funny about the joke. God is granting Pinchas the kahuna. Wait a minute. Who's Pinchas' father?
The Kohen.
Not only the
Eleazar
Kohen, the Kohen Gadol.
Yeah.
And who's his grandfather? The Kohen
Right.
Gadol. So what do you mean he's granting him the kahuna? He has it already. The answer is nope. Pinchas lost out by virtue of the fact that he was born too early. Pinchas is the eldest grandchild. And believe it or not, you would say, well, to be the eldest, the firstborn is always a wonderful thing. Nope, in this case, it actually worked against him. Because when God removed the kahuna from the firstborns and placed on Aaron, his sons, and all their future kin, guess who was not future kin, but was present kin?
Oh my goodness.
Pinchas was the one schnook. Could you imagine everybody, all the family, what's it called? Reunions, right? Everybody schmoozing about how much fun it is to serve in the Mishkan. Guess who's the one ugly duckling?
Okay.
Wow. Wow.
And to a certain degree, you could think, Pinchas is particularly disheartened. And God is turning around and saying, no, Pinchas, I've got really something special in mind for you. I deliberately did this because I got really something special for you. You're going to be the one guy in history that will have earned the kahuna.
Wow.
I read something about Pinchas and Eliyahu Hanavi.
Yes, Pinchas ze Eliyahu, same soul. Pinchas ze Eliyahu, and they were both very similar. Both were zealots, but zealots on behalf of the people. In other words, both had a fiery personality, but it wasn't, fiery doesn't mean violent or negative. Fiery, a passion for their people. But bringing this back to the point, there's something very important, and this perhaps is the reason why this parsha gets read so regularly. It is the role of every Yid, every Jew, b'makom she'ein ish, tishtadel liyot ish. In the moment where there is no chosen representative, you be that representative. You be the person. Don't sit there and wait for somebody else to step up. You step up. If the circumstance is demanding a response, then you respond. No standing on the sidelines in this life.
You have to have an awful lot of self-confidence to do that.
Or a tremendous amount of humbleness. You say, wait a minute, that sounds counterintuitive. No, it's actually exactly this. I say often, meekness is arrogance and humbleness is strength. Meekness is that when a moment comes calling, somebody's got to do something. You say, I can't, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know. What does every sentence there begin with?
I.
The moment needs you, and the only one you can think about is yourself. I'm uncomfortable, I can't, I don't. That's meekness is arrogance. Humbleness is strength. It's not about me. It's not about whether I can or I can't. The moment, hineni.
I was trying to convince a friend recently to do homeschooling, and she said, I wouldn't be good on that. I wouldn't. And I gave her that same argument. It's not about you. You can do this. You can do this.
And the point is, the reason why you can do this is because if God put you into this circumstance and into this
that's what I said.
If you're
but you need to know your limitations. I mean, you need to know yourself.
Right, but you work with the limitations.
Correct. But you also
everybody has limitations.
But you also can't get yourself tied up. And it might be, again, that your role in this circumstance is to get the profession.
Uh-huh.
but you have to take action.
Okay,
If there's
that's fair. That's fair.
if there's something wrong that is going on, you can't be on the sidelines and say, "Not my problem."
And when you try and fail and try and fail, I
Then,
nauseous.
yeah, then what's it called? I told my kids today they were going on a trip to ice skating, and as they were leaving the car, I said, "Guys, you should all fall a lot of times." That's what my wish for them is that they should fall a lot.
So that they can pick themselves up and do it
Because
again.
nobody on the planet put on ice skates for the first time and sailed across the ice like a swan.
Well, no baby walked after his or her first attempt.
Correct.
They always tell the story of Thomas Edison and his 10,000 tries.
Yeah, no, it was his line. He says, right, his line was every failure is a step toward success. The bottom line is sometimes and oftentimes what you think was a fail is not always a fail. And I'll end on this. Chabad Shliach was doing what's called tabling on campus. Anybody know what tabling is?
No.
Tabling is when you set up a table in the quad, and that's your base of disseminating whatever the information, whatever it is, or the call to action of whatever your particular cause is. You can be tabling for Save the Whales, you can be tabling for BLM, you can be tabling for Chabad. Whatever. Every organization, every cause tables. It's a very, I'm sure you've all experienced it more than I have. I've never actually spent any time on a college quad, but I'm sure all of you remember walking down whatever it is, and the people with their tables for whatever it is. Chabad's doing their thing. Chabad rabbi sees a young girl, college girl, walking by his table, has a very Jewish-looking face, turns to her and says, "Hi, excuse me, are you Jewish? Would you like to light Shabbat candles?" And she says, "Excuse me, how dare you pry into my private business? Shame on you," and walks away. Rabbi never hears from her again. Fail, right? Well, this college age girl is furious. She's walking away furious from this table. Furious. Rabbi accosted her and pried into her private life whether she's Jewish or not. It's in any of his business. And she's stomping her way. Thank God her dorm room is far away because she has a lot of time to contemplate as she is stomping. And at a certain point, she starts, as in a sense, the red haze of the anger starts to recede. She says, "Why am I so angry and so bothered? Had this guy asked me if I'm Buddhist, it wouldn't have bothered me. I would have just said no and carried on with my life. Why am I so bothered? Clearly, there's a part of me that has been touched here, and I'm like kicked in my defense mechanism. So what am I really afraid of? I am Jewish, in fact, and I'm not antagonistic to my Judaism, and I happen to know about Shabbat candles, and I've lit them before. So why does it bother me so much? Maybe it is because I'm feeling a little guilty that I haven't lit Shabbos candles in forever, and it's none of the rabbi. Why is it his problem?" So if I was going to be honest with myself, the one who I'm really angry is actually myself. And so she went to the local store, bought herself some candles, and that Friday night, she in fact lit Shabbos candles. And she said, "Wait a minute, I'm going to light Shabbos candles and then immediately turn around and go to the bars?" Okay, so while I light the Shabbos candle, for the time that the Shabbos candles are burning, I'll do a little Jewish reading. A couple weeks go by where she's doing this. It's like Jewish reading. and why not the prayers that I know are tied to this? Slowly but surely, without making a long story short.
Right.
He's a Rebbitzin now.
How do I know? How do I know this story? Because the story was told to me by a friend of mine, another Chabadnik in the yeshiva. How does he know the story? It's his mother.
Oh gosh. Oh, there you go.
And she says, till this day, she never met the rabbi, never told him whatever it was. This fail was the ultimate success. You never know.
Mm.
You never know. The bottom line is do something. Right? Like the teachers always tell you. Right? Why didn't you put an answer? Well, because I wasn't sure. I was afraid of getting it wrong. Well, you got it wrong when you left it blank. That's for sure. So if you're not sure whether you're going to succeed or fail, not to do anything is definitely fail.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't try.
Yes, exactly. All right, so everybody, multiple reminders throughout the year when we always say, okay, turn the Torah to Parshat Pinchas. Constant reminders that when we see something, do something, right?
Wait a minute. We didn't even touch on this. Are Benot Tzlachad Zionists or feminists?
Yes.
Yes, I agree with you. Yes.
Yes, they are both. And you know who else is a Zionist and a feminist?
I'm listening.
God is.
Excellent.
Who else?
God. Torah. Every rabbi who is truthful is also a Zionist and a feminist.
Wonderful,
Wow.
wonderful.
All right, everybody.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Good Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Thanks so much for the great class.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All the best.
That's it.